what I want to try to put Linux on, or we can maybe, yes. Or we can even try and put maybe 2016. I can download that ISO, and we can try and put that on there later. Do you? Then we don't need to download. We can just. Do you have it on a bootable? Yeah. Just for a bootable USB. I have a blank. I have an 8 gig one that we can create as a boot drive. Yeah. Well, if we can put that on there, then we can install Hyper-V and put the Linux SUSE on there if we need to as well. Mm-hmm. For in the virtual, what's that? Ooh. Nice.
Well, considering that that's what they're plugged into.
We might. You could.
Yeah, go directly here.
Mm-hmm. We'll play it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, it's been years, so we can muck around with it. Yeah, in fact, that could have been some of the problem. Did you use Chrome or Firefox last night for the lab? Because if you use a different browser, there's, I think, some other components you need to install. Internet Explorer will, like, I lost the mouse at a certain point in Chrome. Yep. So Internet Explorer. Yeah, so keep it on Internet Explorer. Or just keep, yeah, because I had to tab through everything. Does it smell? I mean, it's been a long time. Char? Corrosion or something? Yeah. Last I remember, it was working. But we can. Years. It's been many, many years. That's what I had set up at home in that rack server. All right, so we'll finish up one. You already did some of this, right, Travis?
Yeah.
Okay, so yesterday we talked about the roles, right? DNS, DHCP, and later on in the chapters, probably beginning, middle, and next week, we'll talk about DNS, DHCP, WINS. You guys know what WINS is? Windows Internet Naming Service. What is WINS used for? Thank you. It's name resolution for. But the thing is, it's so not resource intensive that it's easy to have in the back, especially with your older systems. Yep. Those legacy, a lot of third-party built applications will still use WINS, and it is so. Yeah, it uses so little resources that it's always good to have in the background. Just because with DNS, the actual name resolution and the fully FQDN, the FQDN, gives you a lot more control, domains, subdomains, and all those. And DNS is public as opposed to just private, public and private. Mm-hmm. Yep. So if you just use WINS internal, you'd have to have a resolution to convert it publicly. Yeah, because that's what ICANN, that's where you're dealing with all your public domain names, namespace. All right, so we talk about installation methods, types. Do we want to upgrade or migrate? and I'm not going to keep saying it tonight. Oh, I probably will a couple times, but we're putting on that different hat, right? We're dealing with installing servers, not necessarily clients. And at home, we're going to install one server or two servers in our small business. We also need to think, I could be installing hundreds of servers. And we talked about data center last night, right? 64 sockets, 640 multi-core or virtual or processors, and then up to 4 terabytes of memory. So you could be installing 100 virtual servers on one physical box. So are we going to upgrade or migrate? Hardware requirements, okay? What do we need at least? Installing server 2000 and then migrating, again, migrating those server roles as opposed to upgrading. Everybody has their book, correct? I got one too. But she was nice enough to.
So would there be a particular reason why my mouse wouldn't work in one versus working all of that? Like a little confusing.
Yeah, are you on Chrome or no?
No, I'm Internet Explorer.
Okay, you have to get the plugin on there. There's a VMware plugin that allows the mouse to be incorporated into it.
But
I
I'm
like how
just
you
saying,
use
like, when it runs out of box. The machine, where you come up, I think it's like hybrid. Yeah, that's what oh, that's fine. But this one, what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that's where mine.
Go back to support. Changes to the VMware plugin.
So it's not.
Yeah, it's not installed. And it's going to take you about 10 minutes.
Oh, ooh. It ain't that bad, boy. 348 megs off the flash drive.
Ooh.
That's the worst. Hey,
Or just switch to Internet Explorer.
that's what I want.
Oh, you are?
That's what I switched over. That's why I was like, if I had the same switch lid, that's one box.
Well, that's the same box I had problems with yesterday. Uh-huh. The London 3? Mm-hmm.
So one thing we were trying to do is we were trying to go from a 2012 R2 box to a 2016 box, but just try to migrate through those. That's kind of like the first two are like proprietary, the original, you know. Is there a way to actually like that somewhere else with the PowerShell? How would I do that?
As far as like a change.
Yeah, I want to completely change my 2012 box. Like, she got the demo, but I have to transfer everything off.
Sure.
That PowerShell.
For the migration.
No, it wasn't, of course. I want to promote to a 2016 box. I have two servers. I basically want to migrate and make this the reaction to onto. I got to move all this.
Well, you still would need a domain controller, so a lot of times you would bring up your 16, deal with your replication, demote the 12, or then upgrade the 12. So you could install 2016, do your replication, move those roles over, so now that the master copy is in 16.
That's what I'm trying to do. How would I move them?
You could do, I'm not sure the PowerShell commands. I know PowerShell will do it. We used to be able to do it through the computer management consoles too. You actually be able to go into the service, right click, or is either a menu option, either menu option or right click where you can migrate those roles over from one physical box to another. Now there's also things like your global catalog server. And we use the global catalog server for, searches and where you can shorten queries and so forth on the network. And many times you're going to want more than one global catalog server for load balancing. And that's, if we're back to our Japanese story yesterday, you may put one on Japan so that they're searching their stuff locally, and then offline they're updating and synchronizing with each other. Yeah, there's a lot of different options. So when we talk about installing or deployment, we have our optical We have our deployment services, whether it's the WASUS or the new service updates, or we get into Alteris, VMware, a third-party tool that can go through and do that. It's at one point when you have it set up, we used Alteris a lot, and if you had new computers, you could literally take on the interface, you could grab an icon and drop it on that object, and it would install the image completely on that device. So if you had a group of computers, like a classroom with 20 computers, and you wanted to put Microsoft Office on Windows 10, you could drop, boom, Windows 10, boom, drop Office, and Alteris. I don't know if it was purchased by Norton or that's the tool. Yes, Symantec. That's who has it now. It used to be its own product. And then USB drive. Why would we use a USB drive? Got it in your, yeah, and you have your little poncho where you can whoosh, whoosh, pull out the USB drives. USB drives used to be a problem when you could, it was $80 for a 2 gig one. Now you're talking, 32, 64 gigs, so we can store a lot more on there. Now, what's the thing with the USB drive in order to use it as a bootable? Can I just say, hey, here's a drive, or here's my USB drive, just copy and paste that image over there, and then I'll go plug it in? No. Correct. You have to actually go through and through the tools and say make it a bootable device, and it will copy them over. That way, when you put it in, you can go through and do that. Correct. Just right-click format. Yeah. Yeah. Disk part and FDisk were two of my favorite tools growing up. Put it on that 3.5-inch. I showed my daughter a 3.5. Well, actually, the old 5 1/4. She's like, "What the heck is that?" Oh yeah, the wobble, wobble, wobble. Oh yeah, yeah. And I was telling her you needed 400 of these little floppies to equal this one little micro SD card. Okay, now once we choose the type, we typically can say I want to upgrade or I want to do a new install. What might force us in one direction or another? What do you think? Okay. What do you mean versions? Yep. The limitations of the actual versioning, correct? Okay. New hardware can do that. Compatibility. Less of an issue now because we can install them on much larger partitions, and the disks are much more fluid as far as making them dynamic, correct? And because the disk can be so large, we don't have to worry about partitioning as much because with that NTFS drive, it can access it in such small sectors. Whereas the older one, if you store data, on a huge sector, even if you stored that much, you would lose that entire piece. So it's very inefficient when you talk about your standard disk. What else might cause you to upgrade as opposed to clean install? Let's focus on upgrade. What else might cause you to upgrade besides hardware, versioning? Okay. Yep. Okay. Typically, paths, storage, locations, directories will stay the same.
So when you upgrade from like 2012 to 2016, does that actually stay the same as far as like everything?
Some directories change, but that variable path also changes with it. Now, typically where I have ran into problems is if I'm skipping versions, like you're going every odd one, where if you're going from a 2008 to a 2016, you're going to run into more issues there because there's substantial differences. as opposed to a 12 to 16 or a 2 to 2003 or vice versa. What else might cause a difference? What if it's just Windows Server? Not as much. What if you're running Exchange Server, SQL Server?
Well, I know that I tried installing Exchange 16 on a 12 box actually.
Yep. One of the reasons for Exchange as our email server is because Exchange is can be very tightly wound with Active Directory, dealing with those domain user accounts. And it makes it easier to manage, correct. So, yep. So that, and if you ever take the Exchange classes, you'll learn more about that. But for our sake, that would be a problem that you would have. And typically, you're going to spend hours, days, weeks researching it to make sure you got all the right patches, you're going through the right steps, you've got support online in case you have a problem, because if you have 1,000 people with email, suddenly you're upgrading or migrating as opposed to a clean install. So a lot of times it depends on the roles or services installed on it. DNS, DHCP not so much, but your DNS, your Active Directory, those types of boxes are going to have a much stronger influence on your network if they are having problems or hiccups along the way. Yes, what server, if you're dealing with forest level, you're dealing with subdomain or different trees in that element, yeah. Whether you're replacing it at the root or you're doing it on down below. Yeah, before 8R2, you will have substantial, and
I don't think there was an option to do it before that. It wouldn't let me.
that's where you would now say, I'm just going to do it clean. It also depends, how old is your network? Are you 5 years into it? Are you 6 months into it? Did you just screw it up yesterday, kind of a thing? And if you're 5 years into it and you have all your proprietary tools and proprietary applications, all those things need to be considered, all of them, to do this correctly and efficiently and not lose your job over it. So when we talk about your upgrade, right? Files, settings, applications are moved to the Windows with that option. It is only available with a supported version like you were talking about. Custom install advanced, or that can be your clean install, settings aren't moved with that option. If you want to make changes to the part, you talked about changing partition sizes, volumes, things like that. You can deal with the disk, and of course they always suggest you back up. Well, and yeah, it's, yeah. So advantages in place, and this is all, everybody has their books now too. Did you get yours?
Oh, I didn't bring it with me.
Okay. She printed one off for you though.
Yeah.
Okay. Advantages in place, generally straightforward, takes less time in planning because you don't have to worry about, am I upgrading this, am I migrating this? Server roles, features, data, and applications are typically going to be maintained. Much more difficult to troubleshoot. If you had existing problems in the old, those many times carry over. Sometimes they are fixed, but a lot of times they're brought over. Your migrations can be easier to troubleshoot. Existing configurations are not carried forward to the new. You can easily move to updated versions. Disadvantages, requires applications to be reinstalled and configured on the new install, requires planning for your server roles, for your data. Typically new hardware and sometimes even new licensing become issues there as well. If in doubt, just Google. Microsoft has many, many white papers on migration strategies. And a lot of them are based on real migration, events that have happened. The big ones, your email server, your database server are going to be key. Third-party applications, and then your domain controllers. Clients won't really care because they're just connecting whatever's allowing them to connect on the other end. But on the server side, That's where we're going to want to consider these things more option.
So is this another case where you don't have like 2 servers, 3 servers, 4 servers, like one box, or?
It could be either or.
Because I'm looking, like, if you had 2008 Warrior 12, that includes Exchange, equal, couldn't you just sit there and build up a box clean, and then replicate?
Mm-hmm.
So
That's typically a strategy if you've got the all-in-one. Or what you'll do sometimes, we kind of talked about it yesterday, if you have remote sites or locations, you can bring one up, let it replicate, synchronize locally, mail it to Japan. When it connects, then it's just going to say, okay, we're missing 2 days of changes and syncs, and then it will just replicate those last 2 days. All different, and if you're dealing with hate to go back old school, but if you're dealing with a POTS line, plain old telephone system, or an ISDN that's very low speed, that's where you may say, I'm going to install that server locally and then put it on a FedEx, ship it, fly it over or even like on an F-16 so it gets there in 3 hours. And on that ISDN, I'm now replicating just 2 or 3 hours worth of stuff in 2 or 3 days. The FBI has they have 2 big data centers, DC and Pocatello. I don't know why it's Pocatello. I had them in class several years ago. There was like 6 or 8 of them, and they were in charge of all the embassies around the country, around the world. And this group, it's one of the very, very few times that in class there were 8 people carrying weapons, legally carrying weapons. So I don't know if that's the most secure I felt or the most nervous I felt. But what they would do is they would go down to these different embassies around the world, and a lot of these embassies, when they left at night, they would go to the wall, physically disconnect their internet connection, and it was off for 10, 12 hours, and the next morning, guess what they did? Plugged it back in. So they had issues. How do you replicate all your data and your exchange and your emails when there is physically no connection? And that was a security protocol. I would jokingly say, why Pocatello? And they said, do you think so-and-so in Afghanistan has heard of Pocatello? And you're going to say no. Okay, there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll see like more of a red dot system, like Seattle running meeting first,
But it's been there for years, and they have a big center there, and they also deal with replication issues from DC, and they have a direct point-to-point connection, and they spend tens of thousands of dollars a month for that secure connection. They do. Absolutely. Yeah, it is. But there's a financial cost, but what's the advantage to that?
Because you would know if somebody had tapped into it.
Sure, and it's a lot harder to tap into it. Well, that's what we talked about yesterday, right? The pizza guy comes into your work and he's in the back room. How do you control the physical access? And that's where you set up the monitoring. I know. Yeah, if I got 8 guys or 12 guys with handguns and weapons, I might be a little more cautious.
especially right now when you shoot first now.
Oh, they do.
Where's the it sounds like it's Boise Police.
I don't know. I don't remember. I knew where it was. I actually had been out to their facility or driven past it when I would do classes out there. Could be.
So before we get too far along here, exactly where in the book are we?
We are, I don't know, if you don't have a page.
Where it says installation method?
Yep, keep going. Right there. And we're on the next page. Yeah, you don't have,
Well, this is perfectly fine, but
Yep.
I'm sure I'll be able to keep up with it.
I'm gonna make them bring in and close them down.
yeah, she was saying Jason could have done that, but she didn't have the tool. So when we talk server, we're talking basically, what, three or four things. Memory, 64-bit, hard disk space, processor, those are all the base, and this is minimum. So if you have an old laptop that's, 64-bit with at least a 1.4 gigahertz, we almost always are going to have more than 512 megs of RAM, and I hope it's bigger than a 32 gig hard drive. But as long as you meet those basic requirements, you can put it and make that laptop now a server. More hard disk space is needed if the server has more than 16 gigs of RAM. So these are minimum. And what if you don't meet minimum requirements and you go ahead and install it? Correct. It'll actually error out and prompt you to upgrade different hardware. It's a hardware compatibility test that it runs. So my thought or suggestion, if you have an old computer and it meets the requirements, install server on it at home. Gives you a test environment. So when we go through, who has installed server before? 12, 8, 16, 2008, 3, 2, okay. Not that old. That's too different. That's a completely different old. Yeah, it's been a while, but NT was, but when we had Windows 2003 server, and if we were installing Windows 2000 Professional, the installation options were very, very similar. The only time it really got different is after the base install, and you now had to manage the roles and upgrading to promote to a DC or domain controller. If you've installed Windows 2010, Windows 2010, maybe 8.1, the installation options are similar, but we're still basically dealing, and this is one of the things you'll see in the lab, language, currency, date, and then the keyboard, whether depending on keyboard, mouse, whatever it may be. Basic options. Again, in that large network, you're going to have the basic idea if I'm installing it A, B, C, and of course you've got the different drop-down options. Most of the time, when you get to this point, your mouse will not work on a clean install, so you're going to just stab through it and have to select the different options. And then, of course, we install. What does the repair your computer mean? Yeah. Got a problem? Mm-hmm. They do.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do you have, distros?
A certain distribution?
Yeah, for like multiple distros.
I'm sure they do. I don't know if you would actually go in, you mean like pre-made distributions, not necessarily ones you make yourself?
No ones that you make.
Oh, you can go through and define your own distributions too.
Oh, okay.
And then based on even Alteris will go through and can take those distributions and push them through, or your Windows Update services can.
You can make it like custom images?
Mm-hmm. So you can have a base, take your snapshot, install the applications, install the drivers, take your snapshot. So now you can do base installs. A lot of these big companies, what they actually do is they don't set up their imaging. They give the image to Dell, and when Dell builds their 2,000 computers, they already image them at the factory, plug them into the network, and they're all automatically configured. Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, because they have to help design that. Yeah. Well, and how often are we going to make sure we get it right the first time? This is where you can do a distribution that is just the operating system in drivers. You can also install Office. If you start to get too broad in your image, now everybody starts to have all these objects and all these installation instances, and you can run into a problem. The bigger problem that you're going to have is how standardized is your network. Do you have 2,000 computers that are basically identical, or are you dealing with 386, 486, 58, all these different architectures, and now you have to build an image for the older versions, the newer versions. Some of them won't upgrade. And why don't you upgrade all your hardware? Yeah, third party, yeah. And some of that stuff is millions of dollars, and so you have that old box in the corner because you don't want to spend the millions. And the guy who designed it, went and got a job somewhere else. He built that little tool, in the closet the other day, and everybody liked it and loved it. And 5 years later, it's got millions and millions of records on it, and they realize that it's not being backed up. I don't have anybody that knows how to code in COBOL or Fortran anymore. Yet we need this. So they'll bring Gary in and fly him in from Minnesota and pay him $500 an hour because he knows how to program in it. And he doesn't mind. Gets to visit Boise. Yeah. If you get that specialized with some of those things. Oh yeah. I know Sun Microsystems pays their consultants a lot because it's so proprietary. Oracle is another one that will pay a lot of money. Now, it takes a while to get that knowledge, but if you get to that point, you can make hundreds of dollars an hour for that type of knowledge. So repair your computer. Again, on the server, you talked about yesterday what happens when you install a driver and there's a driver failure and you get a blue screen. You have two or three options, right? What's one of the things? Reboot, see what happens. What else can you do? What's that?
Load away, redo.
Okay. Clean install. That's what DirecTV does. Hey, my computer had this. Okay, re-image it. 10 minutes later, yeah, but I had a video or no, you don't. It's all stored on the server. If it's there, it shouldn't have been there, and you're toast. System restore. What is basically happening with the system restore? Okay. Okay. And when you deal with, snapshot is many times something you define. There you go. You can do that as well, and that's typically that is not necessarily after the install. That is a bootable option where you can boot into a last known. And there's one thing that happens with a last known good and you will see some questions about this. Okay, when you're dealing with restore points or you're dealing with last known good configuration, it almost always happens before a driver is installed. So a lot of the errors and blue screens are driver issues. Last known good configuration or your restore points are going to go back to the previous version before that driver was installed or upgraded. And if that doesn't work, many times you can then go in and repair. Or the clean install would be the last. Yeah, I typically I'll upgrade the BIOS and see what happens. That's at home. And it's always good to get in the habit reading the BIOS updates. What does the documentation say? A lot of times if you have third-party or integrated video drivers, those types of things, NIC cards, sometimes those things will hiccup. Does it? Yeah, most of those are built, unless you get into an XPS or higher, Alienware where you can actually. So when we get into the types, this is what you'll see in the lab as well. You got your standard eval core, standard with GUI, data with server core, data with GUI, and I believe in the lab it has you do the last one, correct? Yeah. So when you do the lab, guys, you're going to choose this data center with the GUI. It does, yeah. Accept the license. Go through your actual installation. And again, this will pop up in your lab. You have an option here in the lab. You're just going to select the default. This is where if you're maybe on an old machine and you don't have a lot of hard drive space, this is where you can allocate partitions. Everybody good with what partitions are? Josh? You understand partitioning and things like that? Like a hard drive? Settings, your password. One of the things when you do the lab, it's going to have you set the password. What are the basic requirements for a high security password?
Minimum length of
Okay?
one cap, one special character. I think you need a special character.
I use a few. There's also a limitation and when we get into group policy, you can define these. So you can tell the users, I want you to do this. A lot of times you can actually get to the point where you can say no previous. So you can never reuse a previous password. You have to wait 3 times before you can kind of cycle through them. You can also come through here and say, how long? I want people to do it every 30 days. I want you to reset a password every day. You can get, depending on what your requirements are. You could have contractors. I don't know how often you'll have a contractor come in, give them access, and forget about it. And if they were to literally come in a year later, they still might have full access because you forget about it. So going through on that user account saying, okay, James is my contractor. He is helping us with our domain controllers. He needs, maybe not forest level, but he needs a higher level, and I'm going to have it expire after a week. And guess what happens if he's there 2 weeks? A week later, hey, I'll reset it for you, and we can go through and do that. Oh, absolutely. Yep, days, hours. You can restrict the times they are on as well as the times they cannot be on. So it's kind of that black, white, the image, is it one way or the other. So for this class, so we've got our uppercase, lowercase, special character numbers. And the old classes, you would add the @ in there. But that only got 3 of the rules instead of the numbers. So remember that when I was going through the lab, one of the times I just did capital S's instead of the pound sign or the dollar sign. So you have to go through and remember that. Okay, the other part, I think this works. The other part is here. This is for the built-in administrator. What does the built-in part mean? Local. This is not my domain account yet. This is my local administrator account. When you install Windows 10, you have a local administrator as well as a local user. If it joins the domain, you have a local admin, group domain admin. So if that's the case, you could have 2 passwords. You could have your local admin password and your domain admin password. There are some tools that you can download for your phone, tablets that do password management. There's a lot of administrator tools. On my phone, I actually have what I call an admin toolbox. So you can actually go through and control a lot of those things, keep track of a lot of those things. You can have some tools that will actually go out there and parse the network and see who, what, where, when, why. This is also where some people can go in and borrow or find your Wi-Fi keys and security credentials. Okay, so one of the things to look at, am I dealing with a built-in or a domain? migrating your server roles, okay? Guides to assist. I said there's a lot. Everybody knows what a white paper is. You see them in all industries, whether it's medical profession, IT profession, sports professions. White papers are not necessarily law, but they are written, documented, either scenarios or information about a technology that usually has a scenario-based solution. It's not quite as extensive as like the IEEE, where you have the consortium that actually defines what protocols are. If you were to go to IEEE.org, you know, IEEE.org, and search 802.11, which is our our wireless B, right? It's going to give you the rules, requirements, the specifications for that. Has anybody been to the IEEE? If you haven't, yeah, well, because that's where they have all. I was actually in class, somebody installed a new firewall and their internet stopped working. Yeah, the default was secure. I'm like, did he open up the port? She's like, no, he plugged it in. I'm like, port 80, have him open it up. Oh yeah. And this guy, well. So anyway, if you go to IEEE, this is for the test. Some of these might work, will be helpful, just general knowledge. If you want to get more information on wireless technologies, Bluetooth 2, 3, 4, this comes through and will actually define what those standards are. It won't matter to us, but what if I have a company that is building a new Bluetooth technology? And if I want it to work with Bluetooth 4 that's out there, I'm going to have my developers, coders, everybody else know what the specific standards are so they can build it so it will work correctly. And just for general knowledge, those types of things. So you've got your IEEE, the different versions, right? Telecommunications, your wireless, and then as you go through, and you can see that right now we're just on the page 1 to 25. It'll define the different wireless standards, and this isn't just IT. It gets into electronics and all those different pieces. Yeah. Man.
Right now, we basically kind of consider a campus as a man. Now
Can.
it's actually a solar.
Yep. Can.
Like now you know the whole, what is it? What you know, what you have, what you are.
Yep.
Like what you do. Like, so I thought the whole thing of like piping, like a chain lock deal, that's like what you do.
Yep.
But I thought that's like what you know, but the whole notion of you know, I was like, okay.
That's what it is. Who's on first? What's on second? Correct. And again, what was a man can now be considered a CAN or a LAN or a WAN, depending on where you are. Typically, metropolitan was going to be within a city, dealing with more of a microwave or a dish connection as far as line of sight. Campus is usually multiple buildings together. Nowadays, because of the speeds, like HP has 4 or 5 buildings, you could call that a campus, but theoretically, the backbone is so fast it could be almost just like a large WAN or a large LAN, depending on how you do that. So the things that we need to figure out, or at least be aware of when we talk about those, Active Directory, your health authority, Hyper-V. How are you dealing with migrating your IP addresses? Your policies. So we'll see this probably next week when we get into security policies, group policies. How do you manage your print, your documents, your remote access, your WASUS Windows Server Update, the WASUS services. Who has worked with the WASUS before? Okay, let's say this. All of you have worked with it, but through a different medium. Whenever you go to Windows and run Windows Update, that is basically using Windows Update services, but you're using Microsoft's servers to update your machines. So what is the difference between James having WASUS on his own network? Correct. And he's controlling what updates his computers are getting. So when the user doesn't have to say, I want to do updates James instead of Microsoft. They just say updates, and it is pointed to the local server. So now he doesn't have 50 people using public bandwidth to go out and forth. They're staying on the network. And guess what else? He can actually migrate that installation upgrade as well. Floor 1 on Monday, floor 2 on Tuesday, and he can actually control how those updates go. So that's the software update service. Again, most of us just go to Windows Update. We now need to think, I want to have my own update services that I control for all of my network users. Once we've installed it, afterwards, go through, convert our settings, join the domain, activate it, dealing with the licensing. A lot of times that's going to be, hopefully by this point you already know what kind of license you have. You'll have a product key if you need to. When you go through, one of the things when you, let's see, domain controller, we brought it up yesterday, you have to have static IP addresses in many cases for certain types of services. A lot of times certain roles cannot join the domain if there's not some sort of static. If that IP address is changing all the time, how do you know to go through, or how does it know where to find it? All right, so a couple pages. Let's see. All right. Yeah, post installation. Configure the IP address, computer name, join the domain, time zones, updates, roles, remote desktop, your firewall settings. Some of those may be local, some of them may be third party. Everybody okay with the APIPA? Josh, are you familiar with the APIPA? The 169.254? Just so you know, that is Microsoft only. That is a Microsoft technology. The whole troubleshooting, if I have a 169.254, what is not happening? I'm not getting an IP address, which means there's a connectivity problem or my DHCP server is having an issue. And then you can troubleshoot accordingly. Has everybody done ipconfig before, the old ipconfig? And it tells you the basics, right? DNet, yeah, exactly. MAC address, and what happens if you have 3 network cards that are connected? You'll see all 3. Yep. And if you don't know what to do, you can do ipconfig question mark. Question mark will give you all the options there as well. Okay. This looks different, but it's very similar to what we have seen the last 15, 18 years. We have our computer name. This tells us if it's a work group or a domain. Let's see, what are we? The firewalls, remote, whether somebody can remote in, remote desktop. If I have multiple network cards, teaming with those. You've got your DHCP4, your 6 is enabled, updates. So this is basically your summary page of what is set up. for London Domain Controller 1, you've got your London-DC1. This is our domain that we will be using in class. We can see that the firewall is on. We can remote in. Our own remote desktop is not working. And your NIC teaming. What is NIC teaming?
The join two network cards into one. I think it's for I turn essentially to turn to one.
Basically, what is the difference between teaming and bridging? Because we used to bridge a lot.
Is that where it's running parallel or
Bridging is basically creating a through point where I'm going from one NIC to I'm bridging the two together as opposed to load balancing and sharing the load.
Like I've bridged as far as like tether.
It's more similar to tethering. So, or it's almost where you have that as your different layer, whether almost like a firewall concept where you're bridging A to B. A proxy server can do bridging if you've got multiple network cards. Now, in that case, we're configuring the cards, not necessarily bridging. Now, some of the things when we deal with teaming, if I have two network cards and I want it to be a little bit more efficient, I probably don't want both network cards plugged into the same switch. I probably want them on separate switches, so I'm actually being more efficient in the way I do things. Yeah, why not? This is where we would go through. By default, we would be in a work group. We then select the domain. And when we say OK, we're going to get a prompt that says you have to restart the computer. And so once you restart it, it will come up with the domain. There's our key. I actually had somebody in class years ago whose daughter was on the team that helped invent the product key for Microsoft. That product key algorithm. Yeah. Yep. And she was very wealthy. Sure. Yeah.
one thing about those Windows NT, I opened up the set file one time and it's a regular text format.
Uh-huh.
And all the way down at the bottom I was able to find the product.
And it was the actual one. It wasn't some sort of an encrypted. Really?
Only on XP though.
And this wasn't a hacked version or a. Huh. Yeah, you can do a little. Yeah, just through a text editor. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's not that easy now, but if you know what to look for, yeah. So one of the tools, if you want to highlight it on your page or write it down, is your sconfig. It's similar to what used to be what we used to use for our IP config. It gives you your, in this case, we're talking about our server, and it's going to tell us the different roles and settings that we have set up there. And in this case, if we don't have a mouse working, we would see this list, and I believe the lab has you do this. It'll say enter the number. So in this case, if I wanted to go to my network settings, I'm going to hit 8 here, return, and then I can go through and manage it that way. So this is just a less GUI way of doing it. Server manager. This is one that we'll see as well. Similar to our older, well, it's basically like computer management. You can do remote managing here as well. Now, this is using Microsoft, not using a third party. Your VMware, your LogMeIn, the different tools that you can, your VNC clients where you can go through. So here we're choosing multiple servers. We can add roles. Again, this is not something where Josh is going to come in and say, oh, let's add a role today. Oh, let's move this role over here. Let's see what happens if I take this particular option and change it here. This is stuff that once you set up is usually going to stay fairly stagnant. Launch your PowerShell. You can go through and view events. Who goes into the event viewer, right? The event viewer is nice because it tells us what has happened, and based on that, we can guess what will happen. Your configuration, and then you can also control servers that are equal or down beneath you as far as the different roles go. Your analyzer, okay? There's two reasons why we analyze the network, and this is what we're getting into our event viewer. There's typically three types of events that we'll see. Good, and bad. Right? You get the red exclamation, you get the yellow oops, and then you get just the green no problem. A lot of times, what kind of messages what kind of events will be triggered? I tried to log in, couldn't log on successfully, that's going to show up in the event viewer. Somebody tries to access it, you would see failed attempts, so forth. It does.
Like logging on successfully, unsuccessfully. I'm more like, I thought analyzing is like SNMP track. So I was like, oh.
No, but there you can install the SNMP role and go through and do that. But now you're talking more resource intensive.
Well, I always think big. So.
Oh, it's good.
And I have seen people actually overload their services by making too thorough the overall.
Yep, that's the design. So in these systems, if you were to go to your computer, you right click and just go to manage. This is exactly what now this is 7.1 or 7 Pro. So we'll have our event viewer. This is where you can come in, create your own custom view. If you know what you're looking for, you can view those. You've got your Windows logs, right? Application issues, security. This is going to be right here. Log in, log off, invalid access. You're going to see, right? Everything here was a success. Setup, back to the computer itself. Different services. If there's problems with services running or not running, you can come through here. Now, I hope or assume that this has been worked on since 2006. System errors, and then you can go through and deal with, again, your different views and forwarding. Applications, depending on what's there. Your hardware errors, Internet Explorer messages, key management, that's your security keys, your media center, Office, PowerShell. So you can go through and get a lot of information we go into the API for Windows. Now you can actually take it down even further. Let's go look at DHCP events right here. Address, error occurred, initializing the adapter error code, and then you can actually click on the link and it will give you more information on that. We can see that this was a problem with whatever Fox computer, which is probably the one I'm on. If you were to set this up for network traffic, you could see there, this happened on 18th. So the end of last week, there was a problem at 8:33. So get in the habit of looking at the event viewer. Now, how do I do it remotely? If I just go to computer management, right click, and it says connect to another computer, type in that particular computer, I can browse. Let's see, advanced, find, correct. So let's see black box. It lets me, yeah. So this is where you can sit down at one computer, one server, and manage others. This is one of the ways they talk about that. Okay. Administrative tools. We have our admin tools, programs. They're installed here. System tools. So here's our system. On a server, you're going to have your administrative tools. So you can go in to your administrative tools, Active Directory users and computers, your DNS. What is nice is many of these consoles are very similar to each other. It's like if I'm in Word and want to work in Excel, if I've never used Excel before, chances are if I know Word, I can fumble away around in Excel. We just looked at the event viewer. How do you manage your group policies? IIS, performance monitor, resources, your task scheduler. When we talk about administrative tools, we're back in another pair of shoes. Is James my top level administrator? And does he do all of this? Perhaps. Or do I have James, who is my director of IT, and he has Josh, Greg, Travis. They are senior admins, and Travis is in charge of Active Directory. He doesn't deal with DNS unless he has to figure out a shared problem. He's just going to deal with Active Directory. Josh may be in charge of IIS, our web server, as far as web development. Greg may be our monitoring admin, so he actually goes through. Travis tells him, hey, I've got some weird stuff going on here. He may go through and set some queues up and actually start to monitor those. So in many cases, in large companies, very few people know all of this. You're going to have maybe 3 or 4. The rest are very segregated, and they deal with Active Directory, and they have no idea what group policy. I've had people in class that have no idea what a group policy is because they're administrating users and computers. All they know is when they install a user, they need to apply this filter or this setting, and the user can or can't do this. They have no idea that somebody else has created the policy. To me, that's very inefficient because you wouldn't want some failover in those two. That was Intel. Of course, very large. So you're going to have that scalability. So again, think, when you deal with test questions, am I the one administrator for all of this, or am I an administrator for particular roles? The questions will typically say, Travis is the administrator for North America, Josh is the administrator for Japan, and Japan.USA or Japan.adatum or USA.adatum. So these are the administrative tools. When we talked about policies yesterday, if James is going from one computer to another, when he logs in, I can have the administrative tools follow him. So regardless of what computer he's on, he still has those tools. Back in 2000, 2003, if he did not have policies set up or did not have roaming profiles, he would have a floppy disk or a CD-ROM, and he could carry that around with him and install the admin tools at those physical machines as well. But that's a lot of extra work. Okay, so add roles. You'll be doing this in your lab as well. Analyzer. When we talk about analyzer, we just need to realize, one, it's going to be resource intensive because it is keeping track of a lot of different things. Space, memory, processing speed is all going to be an issue. Do you run analyzer all the time? Preferred not. You're going to do that because certain department heads at your regular monthly or weekly meeting are going to Greg saying, hey, I've got some, everybody's complaining about network traffic or how slow their machines are, those kind of things. Okay? So we'll go through, you'll see those different roles, your best practices. Server manager, you will see those in the lab. Okay. DNS, we have a couple options here. What does it mean? So when we see this, we're seeing failure, subsequent resets. what is basically happening in these particular examples? This is for DNS on the local, not the server, or not the DNS service role, but we're talking local computer. What happens if my computer has a DNS error? What's going to happen? It's going to restart just the DNS service. If it happens a second time, what am I going to have it do? It could be a Windows program, it could be an analyzer, it could be a monitoring tool, it could be a third-party tool. It's going to run that program. Hopefully that program would say, here's a message, or it could actually say, you know what, there's a problem with server 2, let's point, there could be a script or something that points it to a different server. If it happens not just after the second, the third and any additional times, now I'm restarting the computer. Reset the fail account after 1 day, everything gets set back to 0. So this could be going on many, many days, and you have no clue if these are set here. Unless you look at the event viewer, and you'll see it's going to say every day at the same time goes through. And then if there is a problem and it has to restart the service, it's going to wait a period of time. Why is it waiting? Why might you have it wait 10 minutes compared to 1 minute? Yeah. The DNS server is being rebooted, or I have bad cables. Somebody decided to put our wireless access point right into the elevator shaft, where all that, there's all that interference, and so your signal is very, very intermittent. Okay, run programs. So anyway, these are some of the things when we talk about services that we can set up. What happens if it fails once, if it fails twice, if there's additional failures. Drop-down box gives you the options to set those. Okay. Remote management. Right here, this is what, right here, oh. See if it lets us now. So basically when we're talking about remote management, Josh may want to fly to Japan every 2 days to fix the machine, but typically you're going to go through and right-click either through a third-party app, through the console, PowerShell, and you are going to go through, network path. Which one? There we go. So now I'm on that particular computer, wherever that is. Is that yours?
No.
Okay.
I just figured it looked like a blank suspect order. The nice part about it is your account was able to add a digital user account, grant that user account administrator on that computer, and then remote into the C drive with the administrator privileges to see all the stuff about that.
So I can go through and see right now there's a session, right? Fox student, there's a Dell, Lenovo, this is probably mine here. You can see how long it's these shares. So you can come in here and see, what is a share with a dollar sign? Yep. Files that are opened. You can get quite a bit here. Local users, right? Guest, frog.
That's what I did create.
Did you?
And granted it administrator privileges.
Right? Administrator, users. Password never expires. Okay.
Well, don't worry, I'll get rid of it.
Oh, it's fine. I don't care.
Yeah, I know, but I need some side.
All the built-in groups. Okay, this is another thing. When you go into the groups, and we'll get into a little bit with users and groups, why would the list of default groups will vary based on what's installed? If I have DNS installed on this machine, I will see DNS groups in here. I will see Active Directory groups in here. So this list may or may not be larger depending on what is physically installed. It also depends, if you have 10 servers, not all 10 servers are running everything. So if I have DNS on 2 servers and you're not aware of that, you could go to server 3, right? James is saying, hey, you need to go to the DNS admin. No, there's no DNS administrator here. There must be an error. Well, no, it's probably just not physically, that role is not on that machine. So be aware of what we see here. Your tests will have some issues about administrative accounts, and you'll see certain scenarios. So-and-so is a member of this administrative group on the local.
So it wouldn't replicate over, and all of us have the role added.
Correct.
Is there a reason why?
If the service is not on another machine, now this is local. So local roles, DNS would not be on another machine that is not running DNS. Locally.
Well, why?
There's no, go ahead.
If it was a domain account, it would be on whatever domain service you're looking at. You talked about local user account. And if that,
Well, I mean, that makes sense on local. I'm not saying like on a domain level, whether the groups replicate over, whether or not doing that.
Oh, yes, domain groups will.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not
so,
talking about like local.
okay. So these are, so what I was meaning was, if your computer had DNS and his had DNS, if I went to that machine, there would be no DNS local group.
Okay.
Now, the domain account would be able to be accessible wherever that you as a domain administrator logged in.
Okay, I'm tracking now.
Okay, does that make sense? So this will depend on, do you have everything installed on that one machine, in which you'll have another 15, 20, 30 group built-in, local. Now, in this case, it's local to whatever 6 core is, because I'm remoting into this one over here. Everybody use remote desktop or some variation of it, VNC, a team viewer, log me in. There's some you pay for, some are free. If you don't have one, it'd be nice. Google has their own remote desktop tool with Gmail.
Is there any security issues with the Chrome one though? I kind of find it a little interesting using a browser.
I'm sure there are some. I think with Chrome, you're dealing with the number game, and you're dealing with most will be most secure most of the time.
if I was going to have a guess, every single Google license agreement says that Google has the right to record and use and distribute and transmit any bit of information that passes through a system.
What?
Oh, yeah.
No.
So in other words, so theoretically, if you're going to a Google remote desktop app, it would actually have access to any user accounts, passwords, data, anything else you access to that system.
I installed it on my phone, the Google viewer, and the next day when I logged into my laptop, I got a message saying that it was remote desktop enabled without touching my laptop.
Because you logged into the Google account.
Because I set it up on my phone, my laptop, when I logged in. I guess I logged into my account, or I opened up Google Chrome. It was Google Chrome, and it automatically let me know that, oh, this is now remote accessible by Kyle. Just like last week, I had somebody apparently in Gary, Indiana, try to log into my Google account. And I know I was not there, so
I do like that they at least have notifications for that.
they do.
Even Steam does.
I'll go through, and if the other day I was in the other classroom and I logged into Gmail there, within 2 seconds on my phone, I had 2 messages pop up. Is this you? Is this a allowable browser? If not, view your history. That is very, very nice.
If somebody is actually trying to hack your system, it's too late by the time you check. It's actually going to come.
Well, yeah, when we're dealing with this, it's either preemptive or oops.
Yeah.
Well, actually, about that, I get that all the time, like, on that here and whatnot. But however, my
Sure.
and then you have the
You can also subscribe to certain public lists that, yeah, that we'll go through. Yep, you can set it up to. There are also certain public IP ranges that are known to be associated with certain hacking organizations, and a lot of times if those public IPs are seen or viewed, they immediately lock. A lot in Europe, Russia, some of those, I want to say the Canary Islands, there's one of those areas where it's actually considered like an international water, so they have. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pirate Bay is still there. The big one that went away was not BitTorrent. Was it UltraTorrent? There's one that was the number 1 or 2 torrent.
Oh, there's a kick-ass torrent.
Yep. Were they finally able to shut it down now? Yiffy, Y-I-F-I or Y-I-F. It does. You still see a lot of those out there, but originally it was shut down. Yeah. Which one? What's the AM country? I don't remember. Argentina. Isn't AG Argentina? RU Russia? Live movies, real-time movies.
Well, like back in the day, I figured out torrents when I was like rat, and that was like ISO hunt was the one I would use.
ISO Hunt, yep.
And then like that went away, and then they brought it back up. I think that's just the honeypot, to be honest with you.
There's several. That's where my brother started doing it. He actually had he had a friend that actually gave him physical black boxes, which was cool. So now he could hook it up to his TV, and through that box, it has torrent built into the OS on the box. So now he just plugs it into the back of his TV or into his home network, and he gets all the. So now he's just watching everything on his movie, on his TV. He was selling them for about $160.
That is totally good.
I don't know.
Rooting Amazon Fire Sticks or whatever.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same thing.
Yep. You can do the Fire Sticks, the Roku sticks, not as much. But he had one. So I was there 2 years ago. I like rugby, watching rugby, and so the Rugby World Cup was on. So we just got into the box, browsed for the different rugby channels. Everything was live. Now, if you can also see all the new movies. So instead of downloading or bar,
The ones you pay for on like direct TV,
a lot of those, yeah.
but are these the ones that are shot like in theater?
There are some of those people walking around and somebody sneezes and
The first time I saw Two Towers, this was the last time I used the BitTorrent, and that was Pirate Bay, and I watched Two Towers like the week after it came out.
Yep.
Okay, but it wasn't very good. And then, I don't know, a couple months after that, it occurred to me that if I actually wanted to do this professionally for a career, I could not afford even somebody viciously thinking that I was doing something illegal to do a software. And so I haven't touched it yet.
well,
And it's
some, I'm not saying what is or isn't right. You have your choices. To me, the line is if somebody is profiting from it.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing at all with that.
For me to spend, for my wife and I to go to a movie and spend and the kids, 3 kids, that's $100.
And that's just the thing, popcorn.
Yeah. So, and if I'm not sure if I'm going to like it, I will observe it beforehand.
Actually, I've played it. There's some of that like I actually
Yeah.
time before I die.
I had that DVD backup program before it became illegal for that type of program to be, right now it's not illegal to copy movies and stuff off of DVD. It's illegal to bypass the copyright protection.
There are, what is,
But see, it's only legal.
And you can still make movies for yourself, but you can't just give them out.
The other thing, the other change that I thought I had the tool there. The other change that you're starting to see now is SaaS, software as a service. So years ago, or even months ago, whatever it was, if I wanted cable, I had to subscribe to DirecTV or cable. But what the trend we've seen the last probably 3 to 5 years is now that people have internet speeds the way they are, I'm just going to get a phone number for my modem. I don't want a home line. I don't want to subscribe to cable. And I'm going to go through and spend money on my Hulu. There's Vudu where you can download movies. You've got, of course, Amazon Prime. You can also go through on Prime. If you subscribe to HBO, you can then get Stars and all those. So you just pick and choose what you're paying for. Sling TV gives you a lot of the third-party sport channels, all those. So now you can actually cater that tool or that service to how you want. What do you watch the most? During Christmas, my wife likes the Lifetime movies. So this Christmas, I know.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. She goes to her mom's to watch them.
That's nice.
Last week told her, right? That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
Well, so you know, like the whole next travel thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like what that kind of kickstarted with is between Verizon and Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know about that?
No, I don't know enough about it.
So you guys know like the backbone, right? Like the backbone to a network. Essentially, imagine having 8 out of your 10 customers using Netflix, but soaking up 80% of bandwidth.
Yep.
So they figure since you're using the majority of bandwidth, you're paying a little bit more.
Yep.
So what they were doing is they were throttling Netflix, and if they wanted more, Netflix had to pay Verizon.
Yep.
So that's where it's getting at is people are like they're using a lot more resources, they're paying the same as everyone else.
Well, and since the speeds are faster, those providers like Netflix are allowing a higher bandwidth accessible for viewing.
But now it's screwing you guys because most companies only have a data cap of like 500, 600 gigabytes.
Cable One has their base 100 meg. I think access is 300 gigs a month.
But then at 1 hour at 1080p is 3 point something gigabytes.
Right, no, the high definition Netflix, 7.5 gigs.
Who's that?
Yeah,
I have Verizon. It's unlimited data, but after 20 gigs, it's
They only throttle you on the basic network.
yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is, where I live, right up on the hill, right behind me, is a T-Mobile tower.
There you go.
brand new one, and Vail, Oregon, it's not a problem. It's not.
Yeah, you're
I live out
lucky.
in the country, so I got like one bar, which like but my 4G through the roof.
Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah.
I can get up to 20, 25 meg downloads on mine if I'm in the right spot.
How much?
20, 25?
I was by I don't know what hospital it is, off Curtis.
St. Al's.
I was out there for AT&T, 102 down, 65 up.
Holy
And
cow.
AT&T
I live on Maple Road now, so I could pay for one of those 40 DSL with the tab, it's pretty awesome.
Yep.
But they do monitor.
Yeah, but I don't do anything that's
Fair.
further.
Yeah.
I did
That's
get a
your
warning.
wi-
Actually,
wireless?
It was a warning from the DSL thing that they detected something I had downloaded like 4 years ago that was on my computer, and I'm going,
What's the
how
tool?
did
Speed
you
test?
download
I've got that
it?
one.
Oh, well, it's part of our server
Through.
that do all kind of, and they back that all this other kind of crap, but at that point, I'm pretty clear that I
Unless that program talks back to another ship.
it could be. I really don't know, but I didn't want to find out.
I'm using speed test. I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Anything in anything.
That one I used to use the most, but I had to over.
You're wanting to download like
So, which is the one you use? Open Signal?
Yeah. That's the top rated one, that's what a lot of the big companies use, they're trying to compare this network. Because it does like
It
a
costs you
test
money,
off.
like Norway, Iceland, like one of those.
And I'm sure you can choose what servers to go to as well as it'll auto. Yeah, so I'm on, right now I'm on wireless, or the wireless here, and I had 30 down, 20 up.
The Wi-Fi here is lower than my network.
So let me see.
I can tell you that they have two internet. One, you have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's Cable One.
Well, if people look
But
at
I mean,
but
it's
your
separate.
directional went up to class A and your Wi-Fi went up to class B.
Yeah.
Okay,
At least
one.
it used to be.
I'm I'm not sure if they like duplex, like, you know, half duplex you on the Wi-Fi, which makes sense.
So almost 80 down and 14 up.
On T-Mobile?
I'm at 35 down, and my up,
We go outside this building and be like that.
my up is at, oh, there we go, 5,
Only
4,
that's the data.
3, 7.
I think I'm up to like 107.
Yeah, Cable One does not monitor, but they
Cable One does to a point, but not as stringent as
CenturyLink, yeah.
My brother was Canadian, he kept downloading crap in my house, and I got shut off 3 times. I'm like, "We're downloading my house,
Yep.
dude."
But there's not the caps.
DSL actually.
Yeah, or at least within nothing like 300 gigs or the 500
When I
gigs.
when I lived in Boise, we moved back and forth. I had a kid at Disney.
Yeah.
That way there wasn't.
Yep.
My fiance lives out in the Caldwell, Napa area. That Cable One, they have a 200 gigabyte cap or whatever, but they also had 4 teenagers, one 6-year-old and 2 adults that were internet users. And so they caught that easily because they didn't know you could turn Netflix on low resolution to get on the same picture.
Well, and
They
even
were running
then,
at high resolution, which is 7 gigs or something like that for an hour's worth of high definition. It's nuts.
well, my son has an Xbox One,
Yeah.
so if he were to
PS4.
purchase and download a game, he could chew up 40 gigs in
Yeah.
a couple days. I'm a networking administrator. I'd go, I'm an IT geek, so I could go to OpenSUSE, download a 5 gig file. I could go to Microsoft, and within 2 or 3 days, and that's what I've told them. I've said, I just downloaded 50, 60, 80 gigs in the last 2 days. Well, what are you downloading? Server operating systems, client operating systems. I just bought a movie, or I bought, my son's on Xbox and bought a 40 gig game. So there's,
Well, that's the part that's mostly related. Everything's on cheaper that way. You don't have to leave the house. But they push you with a really ridiculous package.
From what I've been told, other countries, even poor countries, their internet and cell phone service is like $5 a month.
oh yeah.
International, they don't cap it. I mean, Europe doesn't actually cap their stuff.
And a lot of those actually have public wireless cities.
I thought that like Meridian Boise had like free public Wi-Fi.
I don't know, I've heard they do or were going to, just in the downtown area. I don't know if that's the case.
I'm running a solid 2.98 down. Yeah.
And who's your provider, AT&T?
It sucks in this building. I get outside, it's like 2.98 down, like 1.7 up, man. I know what you guys are saying, high speed.
You're almost equal.
So I have to turn on the Wi-Fi in order to do stuff. So I'll never be equal.
All right, PowerShell. This is one of the ones that you will see test questions on. This has been around for 2008, 2003. We started to hear about it. We did a lot more command prompt and so forth, but really basically 2008, PowerShell has now become the big issue. And that came out with what type of server product? The core. We're dealing now with the non-GUI. We talked about it yesterday. Less resources, less space, more efficiency, less security issues because there's just, it's very thin as far as what it can do. Now when we get into PowerShell, let's see, in your book, lesson 5, when you get into the commandlets, you'll have a page there that I think should give you a list of, yep, right there on the right side, about halfway down. They don't? Try a different one. Oh. I think they're all kind of, that's because they're just dollar store ones.
So would you probably just run core, maybe on like a DHCP server, that everything's open source without this stuff? Like, what would be the purpose? So like, what would be like the legitimate use of a core?
Security and resources.
Well, no, so I'm thinking like those two out of the picture. Like,
Okay.
what would you ultimately would think? I mean, clustering server, you don't really touch.
We have ones that are less needed, less administrative work.
Why just stick like in the broom closet and let it go?
Even with PowerShell, you can still remote in. To me, it's also going to give you it. We don't necessarily like to hear it, but you get more control because you can go through and specify specific things instead of right-clicking, see all the services. Whereas now you're just doing a get or a set, and you're just seeing, oh, I just want to get AB. I don't want to see.
Like a Linux server with like literally nothing installed and then go out and pick it.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah, and what we're doing is when we deal with security, depending on who you talk to, you have two ways of doing it, in my opinion. Two general ways. One, you lock it down and you open it up as you need to, or you open it up and then secure it as you need to. I like to go secure, and then if I have issues, I will then open up certain pieces. Similar when we deal with the core. I don't want a lot of stuff installed and running on it. Not that that machine can't handle it, but if I'm following good practices, then I want to do that accordingly. So, yeah, every little bit helps. And if I'm in a huge network, a couple milliseconds added up is significant. So, PowerShell, one of the things that I know the difference is it has the visual. Actually,
ISE was more like a program designed for writing.
but ISE has also the list on the right. So you'll see
Integrated scripting environment.
integrated what?
Scripting environment.
I had.
If I went there, you can click on the shortcut link and understand.
Let's see where it went.
So the IFE was more visual though, had more like little scripting commands to save them and stuff like that.
Correct. The regular PowerShell. However, the regular one will give you more. You'll have a little bit more options. Yep. Whereas in the regular PowerShell, if you type the syntax right, you'll get the drop downs.
You can actually have access to any options in that Windows server as long as you know how to type stuff that you get to it. Whereas with the ISE, you're more limited because it has certain functions you have to use to operate within the function. Same thing with an interface. An interface is limited to what options are there actually enabled on that interface.
Correct.
So that's really the difference.
And you can enable and or install them. So I actually did a little bit of search. Let's see, PowerShell ISE versus the Power GUI. Most obvious strength of the ISE is that it's already installed. Power GUI, we need to actually go through and install afterwards. That's what I actually did yesterday on the laptop or the day before. Does Power GUI have more add-ons since it's been around longer? The distinctions depend on your focus. Some of the advantages, PowerShell ISE is different, not quite comparable to the GUI. It is not a full-fledged text editor, but is intended to be an out-of-the-box console tool that serves as a scripting editor. Yeah, compared to just text. So remember the thing I mentioned yesterday, why do we capitalize parts of the word? Helps us troubleshooting. Helps us go through and do that. The nice thing with a text editor, what's the difference between a certain text editor and an actual scripting tool? The syntax. What's the difference? What's the advantage of having color-coded syntax compared to just black? If I don't see a color, I've probably typed something wrong.
Not like that though, but certain commands, their command is like specific to really highlight
And the one thing to realize with PowerShell, Google is a great tool, and unless you use it a lot of the times, unless you use it a lot, you're not going to know what it does or what is accessible. I know I can do it. The key is going to be either knowing it or know where to go. And you can get some PowerShell Bibles that will give you a lot of the syntax. And if you know how to do the auto syntax, which is extremely helpful. So here we'll have some of the PowerShell. Let's see. What do we notice here? Set. What are some of the other options that we have for PowerShell? Get. It'll say, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's about 12, 15.
I use PowerShell actually to back up my GPU, so I can export them.
Yep.
That was
And what happens if you type it wrong?
man.
Yep.
Well, actually, it didn't work in the
Yep.
top and there, and I think I don't remember it being like Cisco where it actually like went zero to like where the issue is. That was like where it first popped up in there.
No.
But it would just be like
It'll come back with an unrecognizable or some sort of a syntax. But with PowerShell, you could go to a directory, grab information, change the directory, move the files, copy. So the things we have with the different PowerShell, it's in your book. Get, new, set. I could restart, resume, stop, suspend, clear, limit, remove, add, show, write. And there's a couple highlighted things where it says I can get something, I can set something. When we're dealing with PowerShell, you kind of have to know what you're going to reference and how are you going to set it. So the key with PowerShell is going to be practice, practice, practice. It is. And for me with PowerShell, I do not use it a lot. If you talk to a Linux guy, they're going to laugh at you if you say, I don't like syntax. I like the GUI. I have no problem with that. Fine, laugh at me. I don't care. But for the testing, you'll need to know it. And if you do, what happens if you do have an environment where they're going to work on core? Now you can say, I understand PowerShell. I understand the syntax. And similar to Active Directory, if somebody wants to do it, you probably can. You can probably find a command to do it. If you've worked in Cisco, if you've worked in HTML or other programming languages, this will make a lot more sense to you. What's that? Yeah. I can much easier right-click and say do this as opposed to PowerShell. And I work very much in a visual environment, more positively, more better. So PowerShell ISE, here we have some of all the commands that we have if we want to add. So if Josh doesn't know what he needs to add, he can now go through here and you can see there is an enormous list. If he wants to add a computer, for me, right-click Add Computer is easier than going into the PowerShell, but if I need to, and for testing, you'll want to do it. So ISE, we can do our commands. One of the other things in the lab that you'll want to make sure of is that when you go to the PowerShell, you'll want to make sure you're running it as administrator. Because you could run the command, you swear you have it right, and it's not working because you're not using the right credentials. So make sure, and if you want to do it as administrator, you can right-click, say Run as admin. Okay? We'll be doing that in the lab. PowerShell, let's see. Push-pull. Trying to, okay. Yeah, I went through that fast. I should have even gone through it faster. All right, so we're going to do the lab. It should not necessarily take 75 minutes. The things to remember, there are exercises. Everybody should have it in their book. The machines remember yesterday when we did the intro, there was like 12 different machines that we can use or that are there. These three, we're using the domain controller, we're using the server, and we're also going to be using a core server. There is your administrator account, and remember there's the password element, and I did write it on the board if you need it. Travis, did you finish it already?
Yeah.
Okay, has anybody else finished or worked? Are you? Okay, so maybe they can help or troubleshoot if I know Travis was able to go through it pretty smoothly. Did you install the tools?
Yeah.
They went in now? So if you guys are having problems like with the mouse and cursor, you could possibly, if James is okay, can even see some of that instead of having to download it. Or he can show you how to download the... Oh, never mind. All right, so let's go ahead and do the lab. If you want to take a break, we'll kind of throw it all together. It is a little before 8. It's 7:45. All right, let's do this. Does anybody have questions that are specific or I can address that we won't run into? If you don't have questions, if everybody's okay with it, this says 75 minutes. But since we have 45 minutes left in class, go ahead and take a break, do the lab, and then tomorrow we'll pick up with chapter 2.
My concern is that the lab, though,
What time do you get here? A little before 5:30?
I can be here at 5.
If you can't finish it tonight, come in around 5 and then you can finish it up beforehand.
Finish it work, man. They
Just,
don't work.
just clicking save on their actual stop where you're at.
It'll save the state of where it is. Now, for me personally, I would probably save the state in a common spot as opposed to like in the right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, like it's got sections.
But yeah, it will save the state and should save configuration and settings at that point.
I don't need to take lunch for, I don't have time. I probably should, but I don't.
Does anybody have a problem finishing up with the lab? And if you need to finish it tomorrow, work on it and then start to?
I'll probably finish it tomorrow.
Okay,
I'll
either
finish
way.
it whenever we have time. This thing is like, so right now I got that tool to find the work, but the lad on it, look at that. Only the system. Oh.
Gesundheit.
See, look at that.
Got the
So
PIPA
that's my butt, and we're supposed to statically set it to, I'll show you,
172.
16.0.101. Thanks, you're gonna live. That's what I was supposed to do. And that's, that was the issue I had down here on core. Same thing, I would statically set it to whatever it wanted me to. Constantly setting it because it kept pop. So on core, 0.111 is what it was. Then I kept restarting, but then instead it had that, then the next to it populated HIPAA. So every time I did an IP config, it would just show me the HIPAA. But on my network thing, it was sitting there telling me, see, there's, how do you pop one but not the other? Blows my mind. I hate 2012. I could do this on 16 days a week.
So your
Because I can't connect the domain. I mean, I've tried to release and renew, and it just gives me errors because it's not a permissible state. I'm like, okay. I've restarted 4 times,
it as a duplicate.
So unless it's one of my other machines, I don't know.
That's
I'm
probably,
I'm gonna go smoke some crack. I'll be back. Get me pumped up and going because I have another machine that's 111, but I
No,
just
that
said
wouldn't
it's
do
not
it.
101, so I don't know how to go back and look.
so to me that looks like there's an auto config, which I think we have turned off, set to static, but because it's a duplicate and already taken up,
The weird
It will
thing is though,
default.
that should pop up down here and be like, hey man, there's a duplicate.
down in the message or the
Yeah.
warning.
What kind of crap is this?
What happens if you,
I want to mess with. Take a look at this real quick. I really didn't touch. This really stuff. Oh, so this
Yep.
one is one. I might not have set this one up then.
that is preferred and that's the static. The auto config is enabled, yes. So it's because that one is set up, it's grabbing it, well, it's static, the other one started afterwards. So the problem you would have is, depending on which one would start first, you could have one or the other actually preferred.
So this is set up manually. So was it set manually in the get-go? I don't know. Figure that out. Go back up here and figure out OS. Started, did it, did it, did it. That's really weird. It mentions it that one time. But this is the what box though? See? The server 3 box. It's not mentioning the server 3 OS. Mention it one time. So why would there be? Why am I having the same? Why would I have a server 3 than a server 3 OS?
I wonder, is the server 3 OS server, or is it, it's not client?